If you want a challenge that's harder to crack than a bunch of Brazil nuts, how about trying AlphaDraft, where you compete against hundreds, dozens, 1, 5, 10, whatever amount of people in particular contests for fantasy esports in CSGO, Dota 2, League of Legends, to see if you can win sick money and have fun along the way by showing what you know about the game, who you think will do well, enjoying the luck of sometimes doing so. Now, speaking of Brazil nuts, Brazilian fans are nuts. They're always talking shit. They're always messaging me on Facebook and Twitter saying about how Luminosity is going to win every single fucking game in CSGO. Well, you know what? If they really believe that, maybe they should put their money where their mouth is. Enter some contests, start picking out players from Luminosity, show me that Coldzera is going to carry, that FNX is going to have a big game here, that Taco's not as bad as we all say he is, assuming you live in a state or country where you can play on AlphaDraft. If you want to play and all of the above is eligible, alphadraft.com. Now then, Coldzera as a player is someone where I feel like his arrival onto the international scene was pretty impressive because he only came into Luminosity's team in like the latter half of July of 2015, and yet over the last 6 months of the year he put together consistently good performances and he showed himself to be the new star player of that team, which formerly had been really all about Fur, and he was doing it from a different style of play as well, and his strengths, he showed his gun strengths to be as good as some of the top European players. And all of a sudden, there was this player who was better than any NA player, and he was consistently performing, and he was having good performances at majors, and was having big performances at LANs. The problem is, his rise was so good, and it was so consistent, and it was so in such a short span of time that people went too ham with it. And so as a result, you had people, even just at the end of last year, saying, look at this guy's stats, they're fucking crazy on HLTV.org for the events and the games, and then saying stuff like, oh, he's a top 5 player in the world already, oh, he should be already like super high up on the top 20 players of the year list. Here's the problem with that. Is that up to that point in time, the end of 2015, that was actually unreasonable. They'd gone way too far with that, and they'd got a little bit too... They bought into the hype, and they exaggerated how good he was. Whereas, when you looked at his stats up to the end of 2015, they weren't actually that insane. They weren't that crazy. And here's the key thing. There are two Coldziras. There's the Coldzera from that last 5 to 6 months of 2015, who's a good, consistent player, who's entering a top quality performer level, but isn't a top 10 player in the world yet. And there's the Coldzera of the first few months of 2016. And that guy is a different player. That guy has had phenomenal performances tournament after tournament. That guy really has stepped his level up to where now he's looking like a very good player. And he's certainly a top 10 player in the world, if not now starting to challenge for a top 5 spot in the world. So the problem I want to outline first of all is that when we put him in context, if we're talking about stats and in terms of overall big game performances, like is he a star player? The biggest issue is because people overpraised him in 2015. I always say this, if you overpraise a guy who's a rising star or a newer player who hasn't had the full chance to prove it and hasn't proven it enough times, where do you have left to go? If you've already said he's a top 5 player, where are you going to put him there? What, number 1? Well, he's clearly not number 1 yet. So you have to be reasonable so that then when they do show more performance and they do show themselves to be excellent, there's somewhere to go with that. So let's look at him as a player. Because first and foremost, let's look at the first Coldzera. In fact, no, here's what we'll do. We'll look at the whole of his career in Luminosity, formerly Keyed Stars. So he's played in 12 LAN tournaments and 2 of them were majors. Now, since people were comparing his raw stats and saying how crazy they were, first and foremost, I'll break it down in terms of raw stats and give you some kind of like some basic information to show that even on his stats level, he wasn't going that crazy beforehand. So the 2 majors he competed at, his teams didn't play that many maps. They played 5 maps in Cologne. They played 4 maps in DreamHack Cluj-Napoca, so 9 maps total. And ESL 1 Cologne, he ended plus 11 for the tournament. Cluj-Napoca, he ended plus 17, and his team made the round of 8 both times. So those are okay performances. Good for a player outside of Europe, certainly. This is solid performance across the board, but not exceptional. Not like top 5 player in the world material. Barely top 10 in the world material. In fact, that wouldn't really even be quite counted because you have to have more performances than that. Outside of those 2 majors, though, here's the problem. So in 11 of his 12 LAN events, yeah, he's been in double digits plus or minus. So he's been in double digits plus for 11 out of the 12. So good, consistent performance there. In 7 out of the 12 LANs, he's been plus 20. In 6 out of the 12 LANs, he's been plus 30 or more for the LAN. So that sounds great, right? Half the LANs, he's been plus 30 or more. Here's the problem. Of the half of those LANs, the 6 lands where he was plus 30 or more, and he's having huge big carry performances like a top 5 player in the world, like a top 10 player in the world. Unfortunately, 3 of those, so half of them, so actually a fourth of those lands overall he's played were trash lands. I'm talking about absolute garbage, because the best players in the world are doing it in international lands. Those lands were the Win-Out Championship, which was a land that didn't even have all the best NA teams in. It was basically Luminosity and CLG competing. It had no Cloud9, it had no Team Liquid. So you can throw that out the window, because Olafmeister and players aren't playing tournaments like that, which is who we're comparing him to. Then you've got RGN, which was, yes, all the best NA teams and Luminosity and Gamers Academy, but that's it. No big international teams, and at the time, NA was in a slump. So that's like just an okay LAN, but trash in an international context. And then the third one was Max 5, which was a Brazilian-only LAN. So that's the worst of all the LANs we're talking about here. That shouldn't even be vaguely concluded. So you take those 3 out of the mix, and yeah, he has 3 tournaments where he had a plus 30 or more out of the 12 he's played. Problem is, all 3 of those... No, 2 of those out of the 3 that are remaining came in 2016. So you can see what I'm saying. There were 2 Coldzeras. There was the impressive, consistent guy before, but who didn't always have these monster lands and just put up decent fragging numbers. Then there was the guy in 2016 who now is a monster, who now is definitely a top 10 player in the world, if not now bridging that top 5 gap and looking with his next few lands, if he can keep this up, to be like a top 5 player. And we're going to consider him one of the superstar players of the world, not just a star player, a superstar. So here's the thing. The overall look at his career would say this. He had solid majors. He never had standout majors. And in fact, an interesting thing about his majors is he would do well in the group stage and impress us because he was so new to the scene and he was his first majors and he was taking over from Fur as the star of the team. But in each of the quarterfinal series, he had his issues, actually. So against Fnatic in Cologne and against Cloud9, no, not Cloud9, Na'Vi, obviously, in DreamHack Cluj-Napoca. He actually had his issues there. Against Na'Vi, he struggled a bit, actually. He didn't give them enough fragging. He wasn't his consistent self. He put up some frags, but not the kind of numbers we expected from him. Cologne, he did all right, but Fnatic obviously were a fantastic team. These are 2 of the best teams in the world, obviously. Both teams went to the finals of those majors. But it did feel like he suffered a bit under the pressure of the series and being on the biggest stage and against some of the best teams. He didn't have that great a major. He just had solid majors, above average majors for international play. Then you look at the other tournaments. He's had 2 tournaments that were truly amazing. The 2 tournaments that were amazing were Face It Stage 3, which is obviously the one where they just got FNX and Taco, which was a real breakout because before that, he'd had like okay performances, but this was one where it was a massive international LAN with pretty much all the best teams there, and he had a really big performance. He was plus 29 for the LAN. They played 13 maps. There's a lot of maps there to potentially go have some problems. He obviously had a monster performance against NIP and was a big reason why they won that series. That was a great LAN. That was an amazing performance. That was like a true legit superstar level performance from a player. Then he had Star Series, which was obviously the first big event of the year outside of Max 5, which obviously isn't a big event. First international event for him. That was really big time shit. Played 7 maps. He had plus 40. He actually was fantastic against Fnatic in that tournament and wasn't at all the reason why his team lost. He did enough to potentially put them into a final, and he was great in these tournaments. These 2 tournament performances are amazing, and these 2 set the ground stage that he one day might be a top 5 player or already is going to become that when he adds in more of these performances. So we had 2 amazing LANs, then we have 2 very good LANs. The 2 very good LANs is CVOP Season 8, which obviously wasn't the sickest field, and his team didn't get to the semis, but he played well in this. He was consistently good in this performance. He was plus 43. Admittedly, the reason why it's just very good and not amazing is because not only was the competition not elite, like he never got to play against Virtus.pro, he only played Titan twice and Mouse Sports, so not the hardest competition. So pretty good performances, but not amazing. The other one was DreamHack Leipzig. Now the problem here was there was obviously no Fnatic and no Envious. So as a result, yeah, good teams there. And obviously the plus 36 he had was very good, over 10 maps, but not on the same level as the 2 competitions Face It and Star Series in terms of the competition he's facing. Then you have a couple of LANs that actually were not convincing just in terms of his play, which was iBuyPower, an NA-only LAN, and well, obviously in Luminosity, and actually he was very underwhelming at this LAN. He only finished like a plus 13, his team only played 4 maps, not very convincing at all. And then IEM San Jose was a decent international LAN. It did lack Fnatic, it did lack Envious, but His team only played 2 maps there, and he was +2. This was actually his worst line. It was the only line he didn't finish in plus double digits. He only played 2 maps, admittedly. So these 2 were quite underwhelming. So you look at the overall breadth of it, and he's having never terrible performances, except maybe I Am San Jose, and IBA Power to a degree because of the competition. He's always having like good performances to above average, and he has had a couple that were exceptional and a couple that were pretty good. So you can see he's getting into the realm of being a top player. Now, when you talk about series play, because obviously one of the big problems of the old Luminosity before they got Taco and FNX is they never used to win big series. The only series they'd won against the top 10 ranked opponent was against Titan, and that we all know that Titan team was very troubled. So, when you talk about big series, people have exaggerated the number of monster series he's had. He's had good fragging across games. He's had consistent fragging. But in terms of monster series where he took over and he dominated, there were really only 2 of note, which were the Fnatic series at Star Ladder, which actually his team ended up losing, and then the NIP series at Face at Stage 3, which his team ended up winning, and he was a huge part of why. Aside from that, he has like good series where he frags well, but he dies a lot. Or he wins good clutch rounds, or he has a good half, or he has a good map in the series. But overall, he's more of a consistent fragger. He's someone who always puts numbers on the board. That's worth saying. He's a real 20 frag threat on every map, so that's legit. That's big time play. But he's also someone where he's not just going to take over the whole game, and he's not just going to dominate no matter what. But he will nearly always get his numbers. Although, as I mentioned, we still haven't had a major where he's had one of these ham performances. So that's another thing we need to see, because it's not enough just to be a god elsewhere. I mean, Guardian hadn't had a really crazy major until DreamHack Cluj-Napoca, so we need to see it at the majors. Kenny S obviously had his issues until ESL 1 Cologne. Now, obviously, these are very impressive stats. These are very promising performances, but he's not quite at the god tier level yet. Now, if you want to look on stats, again, I'll get into some of the stylistic aspects later. Let's compare him to some superstars, shall we? So let's go with Olofmeister. In my opinion, the best player in the world right now. So over the 12 tournaments that Coldzera played, I've given you a breakdown of how he played, etc. I'll now give you a breakdown of what I think of as the first prime of Olofmeister. So that was about 14 tournaments long, and it went from Pantamera in February of 2015 to ESL Dubai Invitational in, I think that would probably be September. I think that would probably be September if I had to guess. September or late August. One of the two. Probably September, I'm thinking. So 14 tournament span, only 2 tournaments more than Coldzera. So remember, I said that Coldzera had, let me see, he had 6 lands out of the 12 where he had 30 plus or more. Now, think of how crazy this is. In 14 lands, Olofmeister had 6 lands where he was plus 40 or more. Now, to put that in context, what's his name? Coldzera only did plus 40 or more 5 times, and 2 of those were RGN and Max 5, which we're not really counting, and one of them was CVOP, which is just okay. So aside from Star Series, he never did, which was a really legit one. He only really had one that was a big time plus 40 or more. Olofmeister had, like I said, 6 times plus 40 or more. And you go to how many times, think about this, out of 14 tournaments when Olaf was in his prime here, in 13 of them he was plus 25 or more. And at 2 of the majors, Katowice and Cologne, he had mad stats. He was plus 58 at Katowice, they won that major. He was plus 53 at Cologne, they won that major. So you see, Olofmeister is in another level. When he was at his prime the first time, was in another level from where Coldzera is. Coldzera is impressive, Olofmeister was a god. Now you look at Olofmeister in the new Fnatic, where we see he's had a revival. He's back to being the best player in the world. He's only played 4 lands. All of them were legit. Like even the worst one, Fragback Masters Season 3, still had NIP, still had XTSM, and had SK. That was better than most of those like average and bad lands that Coldzera was playing. In the 4 tournaments that Olofmeister's played so far with the new Fnatic lineup, he's had plus 25 or more in all 4. He's had plus 40 or more in 3 out of the 4, and he's had plus 50 or more in 2 of the 4. He had a plus 59 Face It Stage 3, which they won. They won all these tournaments, by the way. He had a plus 27 at Fragmite Masters Season 3. He had a plus 50 at ESL ESEA Pro League Season 2. He had a plus 45 at Star Ladder 14. Now let's compare him to Guardian, the guy who before Olofmeister took over the throne as the best player in the world, still one of the best players in the world, a fantastic superstar player for Na'Vi. Now, in 9 tournaments since ESL 1 Cologne, so a reasonably similar span for as Coldzera's run, except 3 less tournaments. In 3 less tournaments, Guardians had 5 times he was plus 30 or more. Remember, there was only 6 30 or more for Coldzera, and Guardians 5 times, only 1 less with 3 less lands, include way less shit lands. Like Guardian had Gaming Paradise, even, by the way, was much more competitive than those RGNs and stuff. Guardian had a plus 33 there. DreamHack Cluj-Napoca, the major, Guardian was plus 83 and his team finished second. That's fucking phenomenal. And that is above and beyond any LAN Coldzera's ever had in his career that had top international competition there. And it's a fucking major. IEM San Jose, that his team, Guardian's team won, he had plus 31 over 6 maps. Pretty decent. He had a plus 75 at Starladder, which Na'Vi obviously came second in. So they even got wrecked in the final. He still had a plus 75 over that land. Another incredible performance. DreamHack Leipzig, Na'Vi won this tournament. 6 maps, he had a plus 32. So you can see, even Guardians outstripping him, both in terms of consistency, in terms of number of big performances, in terms of godlike performances, some of which essentially Coldzera's never had. Again, let's look at another person. So here's one that would be contentious. Most people know that Device was really good from the period of like ESL 1 Cologne just before DreamHack Cluj-Napoca. Then he fell off a bunch after that, right? We all know this. So, okay, from ESL 1 Cologne to now, Device has had 4 tournaments where he was plus 40 or more. He was plus 41 at ESL 1 Cologne, the major, better than any major performance from Coldzera. He was plus 46 at PGL Season 1. His team won that tournament. He was which had Virtus Pro and Fnatic. He was plus 53 at ESL ESEA Season 2 Pro League Finals, where obviously that was actually the tournament where his team XTSM made it to the semis and lost Fnatic there. He was still very good. And at Game Show Global, where his team obviously lost to Na'Vi and didn't make it to the top 4, he was still plus 51 over 10 maps. So Device, okay, he might not have had the consistency Coldzera had, but in terms of big monster performances, he's right at that level himself. So you can see that even in his slump period, he's approaching this level because he's a superstar player. Let's put in Kenny S just to throw him in, just to show you some crazy tournaments that are above and beyond the level of Coldzera, because he's more a consistency player than the take over the whole series, whole tournament, whole game type player. Kenny S has had 2 lands that were huge lands. Well, one of them was huge, okay, the major. DreamHack Cluj-Napoca, his team won the major, 10 maps. Kenny S was plus 66 there. That's god tier shit above anything Coldzera's done. Then let's go to Game Show Global. Okay, obviously this didn't have Fnatic there, but it had Astralis. It didn't have Virtus Pro. It obviously had Envious. Because Kenny S plays for Envious, but you know what I mean. It didn't have Na'Vi, but it had Luminosity. No, it didn't have Luminosity either, but it had Dignitas. This was like an okay LAN. And Astralis not being as good now kind of brought it down a bit. So we'll think of this more along the lines of a CEVO type tournament. But at this tournament, Coldzera's never done this against the CEVO type field. Kenny S plus 102 over 16 maps played. So again, you can see Kenny S isn't even considered a superstar now. He's considered a top 10 player, but just in terms of just some performances, he's got some monster performances that outstrip Coldzera. Although obviously Coldzera can beat Kenny S in terms of consistency at the moment and being the star player of his team. Now let's finally do a couple more. Happy. So people think of Happy, they call him a beta, say he's slumped too much. Happy's had, over a similar span of time, 4 performances that were plus 30 or more. Now finally, just to show you that there are other players, even in terms of lands, that are having monster performances beyond Coldzera, Flamey at ESL ESEA Pro League Season 2 Finals, where his team lost in the final, was plus 99. Now bear in mind, once I took all the filler tournaments out for Coldzera, really his best performance was the plus 40 at Starladder 14. Flamey, at a super stacked LAN, had a plus 99. So you can see even stats-wise, you don't want to start saying, Coldzera's stats are fucking insane, he's like a god in this game. No, he's a very good player who's on the road to becoming a god, perhaps, if he can keep up his form in 2016. Now then, let's put him in context. First and foremost, let's start at the bottom. He's clearly the best Brazilian player. That goes without saying if you've been watching the last few months and studied his team. He's clearly better than any NA player. You think of the best NA players at the moment, who even are they? JDM, fantastic AWPer, struggles in big games, deep in tournaments, terrible with rifles. Nitro, really strong on certain maps, really strong on certain maps in the sense of like a specific map, cache, etc., but not so strong every single game of a series, not so consistent with his output in terms of fragging. Clearly, Coldzera is better than any NA player. Now let's talk about in the world. Clearly a top 10 player for me, especially over the last 5 or so months of play. I think he's certainly earned that right. And in terms of a top 5 player, if I was forced to, I might put him into the top 5 now. But I still think he has to prove a little bit more to really show it. Because he has to maintain that level and he has to expand upon it. He can't have a couple of lands now where he dips a bit, he doesn't have that good a performance, he doesn't carry, he has off maps, he struggles later. Obviously with the mage coming up, this is important as well. He has to start having good mages if he wants to be a legit top 5 player. Now in terms of the guy's skill set, let's get out of stats. First and foremost, you got to look at his weapons. So he's a good AWPer. He actually is a pretty good AWPer. He's not great, because one thing he's not awesome at is he's not good at really big flicks across the map. He's not good at the ones where you have to track the guy the whole way. What he is good, though, is when he has the angle set up, he's good where the guy's around his crosshair. He will flick there with relatively fast firing speed, and he's got a pretty decent hit rate on that. He's got a strong AK burst, and the first bullet's pretty solid on that burst. He tends to be one of those players who moves about a bit while he sprays with like the 9 or 8 bullet burst, but it's pretty good with it. He always does damage with it. That's the key thing. If he doesn't get the kill, he's setting his teammate up to get the kill. He's really good at outputting damage in that sense. He's an M4A4 player, and he's got really nice, tight, consistent spray at medium range. He knows his angles to set up, and he's really good at doing that. Tight spray into one guy, reset, let the next guy come in, tight spray into that guy, and he's really good at damage output here. One of the great things about Coldzera is, even if he doesn't kill people, it's very hard to kill him without him doing any damage. He's going to put out 70 damage even if he dies. So that's really good quality for his team on both sides of the game. SMGs, he's actually unusually good with the MP7, especially because he gets into the medium to close range. He's got a strong CZ, and he's got a pretty strong Tech 9 as well. That's why you'll often see him with the Tech 9 when they do their saves. In terms of his style, I actually didn't give him enough credit for his aggression, because when I watch him play, he is a measured player who moves slowly into area, takes over an area, takes the angles, takes the duels, moves in a methodical way. On CT side, goes to the same spots again and again. But what I didn't realize was, first of all, on CT side, he won't be super aggressive, but he'll take aggressive angles that he'll then hold at the range he wants to fight at. And on T side, depending on which part of the map he's on or what the map is, he will sometimes enter an area to take map control and let someone else entry and go in second or third after them. So he actually will be reasonably aggressive. And if he has an AK and his teammates don't have one, he'll go in first and he'll lead the way and he will clear a path. So he's not the super aggressive guy who runs in the Apex style, but he does have some aggression to him. He's not as passive as I initially thought, because I've watched their team play so often, and when I watch their team play, he is left in a lot of 1vx situations. He is taking people out one by one in a methodical manner, and you usually associate that more with more passive styles. So he's not really as much of a lurker as it feels like sometimes if you just look at the overall bigger picture. He's also someone who is fearless with duels. Like, his teammate can go on the turn and get insta-capped by the guy who's in a good position, and he'll still wait, set himself up, and take that duel himself, and with the same confidence he would if he didn't even know the guy was there. So he's a guy who isn't afraid to take aim duels, and clearly he knows he's got the accuracy with that AK to be able to do so. He's a guy who, at close range, is very good. He's one of the best players I've seen with rifles at close range. And at medium range, he's got pretty decent spray/bursting. He only is really an AWPer on the CT side, that's worth pointing out. CT side, he's a hybrid style player. If he's got enough money and he's on the right map, Dust 2, Inferno, Cash, you'll see him holding the AWP, and he'll go for the AWP as his weapon, and he'll just hold an angle, and he'll play off it. That's where he's good with the AWP. He's a hybrid style. In terms of when we talk about hybrid AWPs, he's a guy where his amount of AWP usage is more in line with like an Olafmeister, where he has very good rifles as well. And so Olafmeister's usually going to go to the rifle, but he'll mix in some AWPing when it's the right time on CT side. And you'll expect him to be getting AWP kills, say 1 AWP kill for every 5 rifle kills. He's not, he's around the Olafmeister Cajun B type of hybrid AWPing. Someone like Device is a hybrid AWP, but Device is much more AWP heavy. Device is more like 1 AWP kill to every 3 rifle kills. He's much more mixing the AWP in. Coldzera is a bit more on the Cajun B, up more towards the Olafmeister end of it. Not in terms of skill, but just in terms of usage with the weapon. He's the kind of guy where when I look at his skill set and the methodical way he plays, you can see the impact Fallen's had upon him. Because I'm pretty sure if this guy was an NA player, he would have actually become a pure lurker. And he would be a lot more selfish, and he'd rely on himself more, and he wouldn't be as aggressive on T-side, and he'd let other people go in first, and then he'd work off that and trade. He'd be more of a Shroud type player. But actually, when I watch him play in Fallen's system, I feel as though Fallen's gotten him to understand when to go in aggressively, when to lead the way in certain spots, when to play a lurker if he's off on the other side of the map on T side, but when it's on his side of the map, to clear angles, to use his superior aim to be able to hold an angle for someone so his less skilled teammate can get into a different area of the map. So I can see how Fallen's had this effect on him, and that's what's made him a more complete player, where his decision making looks a lot more intelligent, coupled with the Fallen system. So you can see he's clearly a very good player, but I wanted to kind of put it in a reasonable context. And I would encourage people, if you want to do this, go to YouTube, put in POV Coldzera, and watch some of his POVs and see his style of play and see these different strengths at play, but that he's not quite the super god who takes over the game. He's actually the player where I'd say what's great about him is he gets most of the easy to the medium kills. He just cleans those up well. It reminds me to some lesser degree of where GetRight is currently in his career, where GetRight's not dominating all the games anymore. He's not taking over the games anymore, but he's a reasonably consistent player who gets all the easy kills. He doesn't always win the 1v4s anymore, though. So he's more around that level with an opportunity, potentially. That's what makes it exciting, is that now he's starting to put together the resume to become like that superstar top 5 player. So let's see if he can do that in the next few months.